Leadership comes from all sorts of places. Workers, teachers, carers, cleaners, people I meet on the street. And indeed, the leaders of political parties that aren't in this country too. One person who's been on my radar for a long time is Chlöe Swarbrick, the co-leader of the New Zealand Greens Aotearoa. Chlöe epitomises bold politics. She's authentic, she's clear, and she's not afraid to listen to. Here's my conversation with Chlöe.
Hey Zack, Chris Packham here. I just want to tell you about something really exciting. ecotalk. It's a phone company that helps restore nature, and it's brilliant. You can find out more about it at ecotalk.co.uk.
Kia ora. Have
Kia
I messed that
ora.
up?
No, you're doing great.
Oh, amazing. Really, really pleased. Absolutely delighted to have you on. Now, some of our audience will know exactly who you are, and some will go, I know nothing about New Zealand politics. So I guess, how would you like to introduce yourself?
Well, kia ora, Zack. Thank you for having me, and congratulations, mate.
Thank you.
It's phenomenal, the position that you're in and the kaupapa or the values that you ran on to get to that position. And I'm sure I'll unpack that soon. But my name is Chlöe Swarbrick. I am the co-leader of the Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand, and the Member of Parliament for Auckland Central, which is the city centre of our largest city in the country. And I also represent a few of our Hauraki islands, like Aotea, Great Barrier, and Waiheke Island. I've been in Parliament for better part of a decade now. So I was elected when I was 23 years old, raged against the machine so hard, somehow ended up inside it. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, hopefully people have a really clear sense of how my values haven't only remained the same, but in fact have become, all the more apparent and stronger, especially in the face of the challenges that we are dealing with, not only at home in Aotearoa, but internationally.
And if I was to sum up the work that you've been doing, and I'm probably going to sum this up horribly, but I would put it into three big strands that I've really seen, is campaigning for a wealth tax, justice for Palestinians and all oppressed people around the world, and also drug legalisation. Yeah,
that is a pretty good bunch of baskets that you put out there. Yeah, so in my first term in Parliament, 2017 to 2023, very much was coloured by that work for drug law reform, and that came about. I never intended to go to Parliament to advocate for drug law reform, but Julianne Genter, who is one of our Green MPs, became a minister in that government. And as a minister, you can't progress a members' bill. So she passed her members' bill on legalising medicinal cannabis to me. And then I just ended up getting into the weeds, excuse the turn of phrase. But the more that I uncovered, the more that I learned that, drug policy is one of those areas that is actually some of the most profoundly anti-evidence and anti-compassion policy that we have going for us. And funnily enough, we operate off the back of something called the Misuse of Drugs Act 1975, which is largely a carbon copy of your guys' Misuse of Drugs Act 1972. It's, just anti-evidence compounds harm. No one's going to put their hand up and ask for help if they risk going away in handcuffs. As things progressed, I was also on the Environment Select Committee, so was charged with passing the Zero Carbon Act, which set up our framework for our Climate Change Commission. And then, through my second term, became a local MP, which was all about connecting the dots from the work that we were doing in Parliament back to a really local constituency and trying to build up a sense of understanding within my communities that we actually can do politics on a day-to-day basis and take back a sense of control and power in our lives, and that those kind of microcosms of hope by practicing our values can grow and grow and grow, and that's how we change the world around us. And then, this term I became our co-leader and have very much set my sights on economic reform. And obviously, as an undercurrent to all of that, with the genocide in Palestine, I think that anybody who would like to call themselves a political leader has a responsibility to stand up for human rights and justice. That kind of just seems like common sense to me.
Quite. And can I ask specifically what you're doing around Palestine?
Yeah, so our whole party has obviously been questioning the government on this since actually it was the last government prior to the election in November 2023 and the formation of the new government. But after, a year plus of holding the government's feet to the fire and trying to get them to put in place sanctions, special category visas, help with regard to aid or otherwise, and them consistently saying, we're doing everything that we can as they sit on their hands, I, in December 2024, put the Unlawful Occupation of Palestine Sanctions Bill into the biscuit tin, or the members' ballot. Very unique form of Aotearoa New Zealand's democracy, where if you're a backbench or non-executive MP, the only way to get a bill or a draft law onto the floor of the House is literally through a ballot system, and that ballot system is facilitated through a literal biscuit tin that was bought at Decca, which is a store that used to exist in the 1980s, and we all have these chips assigned to it. But there's a way to bypass that biscuit tin if you get 61 non-executive members to support your bill onto the floor of the House. So that's where I worked across the aisle with Te Pāti Māori, the Māori Party, and the Labour Party to get 55 MPs, non-executive MPs in support, which is where the point that we need only 6 of 68 government MPs to effectively cross the floor or to sign their name to get that bill onto the floor of the House. I was giving a speech to that effect a few weeks ago, and the Speaker took issue with how I characterised it in terms of if we could find just 6 of 68 government MPs with a spine, then we can sanction Israel for its war crimes. And I think that kind of backfired on them because we ended up getting a little bit more of a spotlight on the issue.
That's amazing. I love bypassing the biscuit tin as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's been a rule that's been in place since 2020, but unfortunately, because of how partisan our politics are, I don't know if you know this, but we're the most whipped parliament in the Western world.
I know, I didn't know that.
Yeah. There's probably a few different reasons for that, but we're trying to have parliamentarians, particularly of the 3 parties on the government side, understand that some things are kind of bigger than our partisan allegiances.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to ask you a silly question. The question I've been asked more than anything is, why are you not talking about the environment?
The old classic. Yeah. Oh my gosh, so many different answers for this, eh? I think, so core to the Green Party Charter, all across the world, right? I mean, what differentiates us in Aotearoa is a commitment to Te Tiriti o Waitangi, our founding text between tangata whenua, Māori, and the colonising force of the Crown, who, since that has been signed, has done absolutely everything to shred it. But recognition of Te Tiriti o Waitangi and our historical need to address that for sake of kind of reparations and justice moving forward. But from that, our Green parties, as with all Green parties across the world, have the same 4 core things in common. First is known as ecological wisdom, recognition of the fact that resources are finite, even resources that do regenerate need time and space and, God forbid, some planning in order to regenerate. If you accept that as the first premise, the next one makes a heck of a lot of sense, logically, known as social responsibility, or derogatorily on the internet as social justice. That is, if you accept that there are somewhat finite or limited resources in society, then we need to ensure that everybody has basic access to those resources such that we're able to have this thing called democracy working properly. The third is non-violence. Of course, we're hippies and we don't like going to war, but I think if you dig into that a little bit deeper, it's about how do you create systems that don't neglect people who further down the track go, hey, this thing doesn't look like or feel like or represent me? And then, of course, appropriate decision-making, where we're nerds for local government, we like devolving decision-making powers down to the level where it actually affects people. And if you think about all 4 of those pillars of how we as Green parties operate, that to me is what a more sustainable and regenerative system and way of doing things looks like. It is the exact same system that is exploiting the planet, which is also exploiting people. And I find it really funny that the people who frequently will wag their finger and say you're not talking about the environment anymore really don't give a shit when we are.
That answer was incredible. Can we borrow you in this country? Yeah. I just want to wheel you out. And give
I am actually a British citizen, so
really?
Yeah.
Oh, amazing. Before we went on there, we were talking about, I hope you don't mind me quoting it, but you said that you had this belief that if everyone just had enough information and
we'd
democracy
make rational decisions.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. What changed that belief and where are you at now?
Yeah, so I mean, I've always been a real nerd, and yeah, I remember just being a kid and reading about the state of the world and going, why the hell is everything so cooked? And then, I got involved in kind of some student journalism, and I was interviewing all these different politicians and community leaders and experts and researchers, and I couldn't understand the gulf between the people who had dedicated their lives to solving these problems and what they were saying was necessary, and then the umming and ahhing and deflecting and nonsense that the politicians would say about how this is just the way that things are. And this is where I think that there's actually a lot of wisdom in children and in young people. When young people look at homeless people sleeping rough out outside of luxury stores, or they read about turtles choking on plastic and they go, why is this happening? And the best that we can kind of proffer them as adults is, that's just the way that the world works. Well, maybe we need to dig a little bit deeper because the world's not working as it should. So I just thought that if we were to outline the information to people and people had time to sit with that, then we'd all come to the rational conclusion that we should do things differently, because very clearly what we're doing right now isn't working. It's producing climate change, it's producing these maddening inequalities, and it's actively eroding our democracy. But funnily enough, that earnest belief that people will change their mind when confronted with the evidence has a lot of parallels with the nonsense of the rational man in Economics 101, doesn't it?
Right.
And after years and years and years of trying to provide people with the evidence and hope that we're all just going to spontaneously organise ourselves to do the right thing in the interests of our common good, sure, making some headway, I kind of came to the conclusion that actually you can spend all this time trying to formulate the most perfect argument and collect all of this evidence, but there is no point being right if we're left clinging to our mountains of evidence when the last tree is cut down. And we therefore have a lot more work to do a lot faster in terms of building trust. And trust looks like, in a political sense, and particularly in an electoral politics sense, it looks like not only turning up when there's votes to be won,
right.
It looks like genuinely caring about the lives that people live and doing everything that you can to try and improve those lives. So this is where, again, as we were talking about before we came on, I think that proof of concept for people that the Greens are not just going to turn up in election time and, hopefully get more people into parliaments, which then means that we can change public policy, but also demonstrating and practicing our values on the daily, where we show people that through organising on street corners, we can save our local parks, so we can make sure that our kids are being fed, or, safer speeds, or whatever the case may be.
And I think I'm okay to say this on air.
You
can tell me if not. You're in the UK, but you're also in the next few days meeting Yanis Varoufakis. You just had a meeting with Gary Stevenson. You're meeting Jeremy Corbyn, Zara Sultana. We're having this conversation now. Do you think there's something happening in the world right now on the left and progressive politics where we're all going, shit, it's time to mobilise?
Yeah, I do. I think that we are in a really interesting time, which is a classic political turn of phrase that means everything and nothing at the same time, isn't it? Yeah. This is the most important election of all time, the politician says every bloody election. I look at it from, firstly, a Aotearoa New Zealand perspective, which is that if you look at the chronology of our political and economic history, it has been the case that we've been through a form of economic transformation every 40 or 50 years or so. So in the 1930s and 40s, post-World Wars and the Great Depression, and some of the worst atrocities at that point in time known to mankind, we decided that we would create the welfare state and pay for that by higher taxes on those who had profited handsomely during a time of hardship for many. We created public healthcare, public education, public housing, and all of these things that were impossible once upon a time, right? It's also a really interesting point to make to people whenever they say that the idea of, properly free healthcare or dentistry is impossible these days. And then in the 80s and 90s, we had the advent of neoliberalism and privatisation and basically the shredding of that social safety net. And now in 2025, we're 41 years on from the advent of neoliberalism in Aotearoa. And that really mirrors the experience of the UK, the US, Canada, and many other places around the world, where people are seeing the wheels fall off.
Right. And
these promises, these lies that we were sold for so long, well, the scales are falling off of our eyes. And I actually think that, the utter horrors and atrocity that is being live streamed to us through our cell phone screens every single day in Gaza is one of those conscientizing moments where people are understanding that all of these things are so deeply interconnected, The same system that is asking you to turn away from man-made suffering and starvation and genocide in Gaza is exactly the same system that is asking you to ignore the pollution in your waterways, is exactly the same system that asks you to step over your fellow human beings who are sleeping rough on the street. all of these things are so deeply interconnected. And I think that that's why there's maybe a bit of a pull for all of us who hold these positions of privilege internationally to knock our heads together, because not only right now is there a need for a searing critique of what is happening, but we need to build the house that we want to move into. And if you look at, I don't know, appeal to the shock doctrine from Naomi Klein or whatever else, the right are so good at using crises to further their agenda. And I think on the left, we've been so obsessed with being right or having everything be perfect or fighting amongst ourselves on that basis that we haven't quite articulated in a coherent way what the alternative is. And people need that right now. They need something to believe in and something to work towards and a game plan. We're not experts, Zack.
Right.
You know, we are politicians. We are people who've put ourselves forward because we really care about things. But we can't hold ourselves out to know absolutely everything. You know, any politician who does is either lying to you or completely lacking self-awareness, and I'm not sure which of those is worse. What our job is to be clear about our values, to surround ourselves and go into communities that will challenge us, and to work with people, being really clear about our values as our guiding star, to try and come up with these solutions and then just move forward and do the damn thing. It doesn't need to be perfect, but right now, our people are struggling at such scale that we need to show that change is possible, not just talk about it, we have to show it.
Do the damn thing. There's a
Do the damn
slogan
thing,
waiting to happen.
yeah.
I love it.
Hello, Zack. Chris Packham here. I hear you're being politically bold. Well, we at ecotalk are being equally bold. It's the best service going, I've got to say. Best network coverage in the UK, lots of different deals, lots of packages, and if you get any trouble, you don't speak to a bot. You speak to a real human. But you know the best thing? The best thing is that the profits are going into nature conservation for beavers and badgers and birds and butterflies and lots of other things which don't begin with B. So, Zack, I'm telling you, if you want to talk bold, mate, you better be doing it on ecotalk. And you can switch really easily at ecotalk.co.uk.
Leadership. So you've been co-leader for a year. I've been...
Nearly 2 years.
I'm sorry, I just took a year off you. I don't know if you'd want to give advice or maybe I'd phrase it as things you've learned.
Yeah.
What are the kind of key lessons?
I refer to something which I've said so many times before, which is that politicians are tools, mate. And I mean that in the sense that, you know, but we are in such immense positions of privilege, and we should only be here so long as we can actually be useful. So I think being clear about understanding whose voice you're going to listen to as to, you know, trying to ascertain whether that usefulness is expiring or indeed, you know, getting bigger. I think that that's really important. I think that also, as we were talking about before, kind of that humility and not being dogmatic and being willing to challenge yourself, because that also can strengthen your views through that process of self-challenge. But yeah, I think our biggest job is to ensure that we are reflecting the people who put us in these positions and just to do the damn thing, which every day means that we get to inch closer to the world that we deserve to live in. So I think it's about, not fussing around making sure that everything is absolutely perfect in terms of the rhetoric, but it's actually actively getting our hands dirty and building the world that we want to live in.
And then on the wealth tax conversation, it's not a new conversation to the UK, but it's really come into prominence in the past year or two, I'd say, because of the Green Party, because of Gary Stevenson, because of various campaign groups. Has this been a conversation for a long time in New Zealand? Because I think you said before you've been talking about it for a decade.
Yeah, well, so we are the only country in the OECD that do not have a capital gains tax.
Right.
Stamp duty, inheritance tax, or any other form of kind of tax that intentionally addresses those issues with regard to redistribution. So we're an outlier. And what that means is that our domestic economy has been characterised by some economists locally as a housing market with bits tacked on the side. And there are certain measures or metrics that you can take that mean that we have some of the most unaffordable housing in the world. So our tax conversation domestically is actually kind of light years behind where it is in a lot of other jurisdictions, where it seems as though pretty much every other party, bar the Greens, is stuck on the idea of whether we should implement a capital gains tax or not. So we decided to just, get ahead of that and deal with the fact that we are seeing inequality compound at a rate that is occurring internationally. If you look at Piketty's work, 5 to 7% per annum for those at the top. We just wanted to deal with that and arrest the fact that we also have a $200 billion infrastructural deficit and obviously need to pay for the infrastructure to fix all of these societal ills, or we continue to watch things degrade. And in 2020, we first put a wealth tax on the table, and then we went out with it again in 2023. And the really interesting thing about that is that the constituency, my community that I represent, Auckland Central, is kind of a map of some of the big issues that we have in the country in this kind of microcosm, right? So we have some of the highest rates of homelessness, highest rates of renters, but we've also got $3 million suburbs. And I was told by so many people who counted us out of winning that electorate, because it was the first time that the Greens ended up winning an electorate in 20 years, that by running on a wealth tax, there's no way in hell that we would win. And what I found is that by going out there and standing on street corners in those $3 million suburbs and talking directly to the people who didn't necessarily fancy themselves wealthy, but, had a variety of different explanations as to why they'd ended up in the situation that they did, well, the more that you unpacked it and had them understand that they are part of society, and that all of these social ills, be it crime or poverty or, a lack of educational achievement from certain sectors of society that very clearly are impacted by poverty, which is driven by inequality. We spend time with people and you help them understand these things, not only from the information and the evidence perspective, but also the trust that you build in those conversations and in that dialogue that we're doing this damn thing together. Right. Well, we ended up winning, and I think that was where my major takeaway from that election was that in order for the Greens to win electorates or constituencies and not just list places, we needed to have candidates who, could directly connect with the community, bold policies and a big ground game. And that I think is where we saw that, now we're in a position where wealth tax popularity is polling well above half of the population is in favour of it. The problem is the rest of the mainstream politicians.
Of course, convincing them too. And how are you getting over, I don't know if it's the same dynamic, but people who aspire to wealth kind of hear it and go, I'm not in that bracket, but one day I want to be earning that much money or holding that much money.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we've got, to say, America's got a lot to answer for in terms of our cultures, eh? I have been trying to address that by having people understand that we live in a society, Very few people individually have the net wealth to be able to afford to build a school or a hospital or even to pay for the real world cost of a loved one's cancer treatment. That's why we build society, because together we can pool our resources and decide what we want to do with those resources. That's kind of the foundation of democracy. So that's where I say that we're not 5 million people all running around competing with each other. We are New Zealanders. And in fact, we have a situation right now where our country is the wealthiest that has ever been on a macro scale. Yet for some reason, we have the greatest rates of wealth inequality on record. More than 191 New Zealanders are leaving the country every single day. 500,000 New Zealanders are using food banks every single month. This doesn't come from nowhere. We don't live in a game of Monopoly. We can and we should change the rules when they don't work for the majority of us. And I think that's part of people understanding that politics doesn't just happen to us. We have an opportunity to shape our politics. I mean, and this is probably quite glibly, I say, if you don't do politics, politics is going to do you.
Right. I always love the phrase, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
Yeah, 100%.
Doing the same thing. With that being said, you're phenomenally articulate, smart, charismatic, all of the compliments.
Thank you very much.
And you're a young woman, and you're so much more than just a young woman. But it's really striking that we don't have many young women like you in our British political system. Is it more common in New Zealand? Are you fighting against, well, you are definitely fighting against the system, but I'm just interested in...
Yeah, I mean, it was really interesting. I was the youngest MP in 40 plus years or so when I was elected at 23 years old. But I've now been blown out of the water by Hannah Maipi Clark, who is a phenomenal young woman. And it's really interesting, when she got elected, a lot of people asked me what advice I would give to her. She's of Te Pāti Māori. You may know her from the viral moment in which the Libertarian right-wing ACT Party was trying to pass the Treaty Principles Bill to undermine our founding constitutional agreement, and Hannah ripped the document up and gave the hooker. And I could only say to these journalists who were asking me, I couldn't possibly seek to give Hannah any advice. She knows who she is because she's so imbued in Te Ao Māori and the Māori worldview, and that comes with such a sense of purpose and collective identity from, the day that you were born. But I still, in terms of my personal experience, I think that when you don't look or sound like the archetype of what the system expects or anticipates you should be in order to occupy a position of power, and I don't think you have to look very far to understand what the archetype is of people who tend to be in politics, I think that you have to work a little bit harder in order to be considered as valid or legitimate in those spaces. And for me, that has looked like the better part of a decade now, trying to have all of the facts at my fingertips. And I don't think I've had a scandal. I mean, beyond obviously when they've tried to come for me a few times over from the river to the sea and my stance on Palestine. But yeah, I think the system comes down on you like a ton of bricks if you're trying to change that system. And that's where I have, I think, immense privilege to know that I don't do this alone. And that's why, to all of the young activists, particularly those who were organising several years ago around the likes of School Strike for Climate, they would come to me when we had tens of thousands of people march down Queen Street in Auckland Central and go, why didn't everything change, And I kind of had to explain the difference between a tactic, that moment or that event of having, all of those people coming together and demanding this thing, and a strategy. And a strategy being a combination of those tactics, but obviously very intentionally orienting ourselves towards a goal and potentially reverse engineering to create the plan to get to that goal. And as part and parcel of that, it's really important that people, particularly young people who are really invested in change, that they understand that they can't carry the weight of the world on their shoulders, because no one person changes the world alone. And in fact, it's quite a neoliberal idea to think that we can. So we need to understand ourselves in relation to other people and who we are in the context of this movement. And I think that that's the best way to minimise the burnout and to make this thing more sustainable, because God knows we need it to be sustainable if we're to create that change.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to caveat my question as well that we've got lots of young women in politics
Totally.
in the UK, like Carla Denyer, Nadia Whittome, Zara Sultana, they're doing incredible work, but they're the exception, not the rule. We see this kind of strongman leadership from Donald Trump, Nigel Farage. How do you resist...
And 3 men in charge of my country as well.
Right, for sure. How do you resist being a... because we do need figureheads, right? We need people who are there, who are recognisable, who are saying the things that people want to say to connect to a country, but also constantly building that movement. How kind of aware of that, and what do you do to resist kind of being the cult of personality?
Yeah, it's such a head muck. It's so buzzy. So we are obviously individual people who have all of our flaws. And I actually said in my maiden speech that I thought that it was really important that the role of politicians was to present ourselves as our full humans, which included with our flaws intact. But the more that I experience the reality of politics, the more that I realise just how earnest a proposition that is, because you present the smorgasbord of all of these different things, including your flaws, and of course your enemies will rake over that. So there is always this tension between who you are as an individual and then the kind of concept of self, right, which people can project a lot onto for better or for worse. And I just kind of come back to this really basic idea of what inspiration actually is, because being in the privileged positions that we are, I'm sure you find, and I definitely do, that these incredible people will come up to me and be like, oh, you're an inspiration. And I'm like, I'm just trying to do my best with the information that I have available to me. And all inspiration really is, at the end of the day, is a mirror. It's you seeing in somebody else something that you actually admire about yourself. Yes. And that should be an invitation to participate in this bigger thing, because it's a point of connection. Inspiration is not a reason to put something on a pedestal and go, that person's going to solve all of the world's problems, because as we've just, explored, that's not how change works. Look back at the archives of history and sure, while you'll be able to identify the people who gave the real sick speeches or who, we have statues of these days or have books written about them, they would have been absolute lunatics if they weren't part of this bigger movement and there wasn't millions of regular people who were also participating. So I think it's just, again, about understanding that all of us are necessary.
This may be naive too, but I think if you own your flaws,
Yeah.
your enemies can try and attack you, but actually what they're attacking you for, you've already owned it.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think that that's also where English people, New Zealanders are so much smarter than most politicians give them credit for. People can see, they can smell, they absolutely understand the lies that spill out of most politicians' mouths. Okay. And that's why so many people end up so turned off from politics, which is why I guess our task becomes a lot harder, right? Because we're trying to engage people with something that for most of their lives has told them that they are not worthy and that they don't have a role to play in shaping society. So,
for a moment, I thought you were going to say New Zealanders are so much smarter than British people. I was like, that's a brave...
With my dual heritage. I just think in general, most people, and this is where I come back to that point that, we also, and I understand that this might sound like quite an out there proposition in the context of just how polarized things are at the moment. I'm increasingly aware, obviously, of what's happening here in the UK. But there are so many more things that unify regular people. If you just look at like the conception of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we all need somewhere to live. We all need food to eat. God forbid we also have someone who we love who loves us back. And if we can unify and create solidarity across all of these different experiences and, geographies and communities on those basic things that should be common sense that all of us are entitled to as citizens, as people of this country, of this world, then that is an incredibly powerful force. And that's the feeling that I always get, when I'm at rallies, is you look across the sea of hundreds, if not thousands of people, and you kind of go, there's so many things that so many politicians could point to that would divide the people in this crowd. Yet there is something that is so much bigger that's brought them all together today. And that sense of feeling that we have in those spaces when we share that breath and that purpose and that understanding of what it is that we have in common, we have to find ways to mobilize outside of those moments.
I take your point about being inspired by other people, being a reflection of ourselves, but I feel incredibly inspired. And I don't like to predict too much what people write in comments, but I'm seeing a lot already of, I didn't know Chlöe before, why is she not running the world? Not that we believe in global rulers, but I
we
think
believe in localised democracies.
Exactly, there we go.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on.
No, thank you, mate. This has been awesome. And I mean it. Thank you for what you're doing to help inspire people to understand their power. This is a global movement.
Hey Zack, it's Chris Packham again. I'm ringing to ask if you've switched to ecotalk yet. Come on. The beavers are waiting for you, and you can go and have a look at them at ecotalk.co.uk.